Good morning, I'm Julia Clayton, Director of Hart. This morning we're going to talk about how to plan private practice. So first of all, obvious, you need an appropriate car, which is mechanically sound, has got an MOT, and we would also urge you to consider the suitability of the car, that it's not too large an engine size or too big, like a 4x4 for a learner. That it's taxed, MOT'd, and of course the second point is that it's got the right cover to cover the learner's driving practice. The second point obviously is insurance cover, and this can be taken in many forms. Obviously a learner can get their own specific insurance or can go on as a named driver, but the key point to consider here is make sure you have a discussion with your insurance provider to ensure that in the event of any accident where you're supervising the learner, that there is adequate legal cover. So you've got the right car and you've got the right cover. And the first thing we would say is before you set foot in the car is talk to your ADI, your approved driving instructor if you're working with one. And this would be the preferred line, that you actually do work in conjunction with an approved driving instructor. Because the whole premise of supervising private practice is that you're practicing what has already been taught. If you haven't got an approved driving instructor and you're intending to take the lessons yourself, then the burden to get fully equipped before you start that practice is even more essential. So first of all, if you are working with an ADI, communicate and ask some basic questions about when should you start private practice? Has the learner got basic car control? In other words, that they can move off and stop, turn and emerge. That usually is the point at which approved driving instructors recommend that private practice start, so that they can communicate with you on what they've taught in the last lesson and what might be appropriate to practice. So we've covered the car, the insurance cover and communicating with your ADI. And now we move on to the big issue of make sure that you've got the knowledge to be able to actually supervise the practice. And the first thing is know what your role is and what the law expects of you. And that is basically that you can't just sit passively as a passenger, as a supervisor. You have to ensure that the driving practice is kept safe. So talk to your ADI again about what kind of interventions might be needed, but also know the highway code and know road law. And it may have been some years before you actually took your driving test. So a quick refresh, and there's many sites which the DVSA sponsor where you can actually do a quick refresh course. Safe Driving for Life is sponsored by the DVSA and does both law, highway code and hazard perception. Some people also elect to get an ADI to give them a quick assessment, an assessment drive, which is useful because they can give you some pointers on where to freshen up. It's really important that you know the driving processes and procedures that an approved driving instructor would teach a young person in order to be ready to go to test. And the most basic ones are the mirror, signal, position, speed and look process, which sits behind most of your driving practice, but also how to conduct basic moving off and stopping, turning, emerging, what the basic principles are behind each of the manoeuvres to keep them safe, and how to do your mirror work. So knowing the law, knowing the highway code and knowing the processes is really important, and refreshing your knowledge of that will be quite key. So that's the fifth point, is to refresh your knowledge. And the sixth point is we call it the right approach. Now, the right approach is basically that you make sure that you talk and plan out what needs to be practiced, and that you do practice in the right place at the right time. Again, you can get advice from your approved driving instructor. The seventh point is review. And this is when you're with your learner, you have a purpose, you're going to practice a particular manoeuvre. Review after you've done the first attempt, talk and discuss and get an understanding of what has happened, what needs to be put right, and then practice it. So it's really quite focused. It's to plan what you're going to do it, and then review and debrief it. And this helps take some of the stress out of your private practice. This is the 8th point. Try to manage the stress in the car. Often it will be the first time that a supervisor has been in a car with a learner. So the important thing is to stay calm and to actually take an active role in trying to keep the practice safe. Of course, we go back to the point 6, which is the right approach. Make sure it's the right place at the right time for that level of skill that the learner has. This all can help to keep the stress down. Don't shout. It really is quite disabling for a learner if there is a mounting pressure in the car. Try to de-stress the situation. Finally, we go on to point 9, which is instruction. Your instruction to the learner needs to be clear and very concise, and it needs to be well in advance of what you're expecting the learner to do. So if you're approaching a roundabout well before the roundabout, about 20-30 cars back, you'll be alerting the learner to the fact that a roundabout's coming up, and then you're going to be directing them. What I want you to do is to go left, first exit at the roundabout. And this level of very clear, well-timed instruction gives the learner time to think about what it is they have to do. And one of the things we absolutely recommend when you're taking a learner out is slow the practice down, much slower than you would approach a roundabout as an experienced driver. By slowing it down, you give yourself time to get ahead of the learner visually, and you can see what's coming up. That gives you time to give that early alert and information and direct them where you want them to go. All that means that they can actually spend more time preparing the car to approach the issue, in this case a roundabout. So clear, concise and timely instruction, and slow the practice down. Finally, how do you understand when something is going wrong? You keep lurching off the clutch, or the learner keeps veering to the left. Common faults which driving instructors analyse, and it's called fault ID. And the first thing you have to do is really to look at and discuss what's going on. And discuss that with the learner, because they may know what's going on, but they don't actually understand how to put it right. So, for example, if their road positioning is poor, and they keep veering over to the left, which is quite common, going into the hedge or going too far over to the centre, there are tips and advice you can give them which will help them to see the road and the tracks along the road that have been made by other cars. So fault ID, again, talk to your approved driving instructor and get an understanding of the basic faults. There's lots of advice online as well about how to analyse faults. But the most common ones are stalling. Why am I stalling the car? And it could just be they're coming off the clutch too quickly. And there are some techniques which are in some of our podcasts about how to stop lurching. There's also techniques, if they're not doing their mirrors, is how to get them to know when and where they should check their mirrors, change of speed or change of direction. So get to know about fault identification. So that concludes our 1 to 10 of how to prepare for private practice. There are some links to key sites that we've mentioned in the notes behind this podcast. And also, if you're interested in looking at some of the podcasts on fault identification, they're available via our Facebook public site, which is called Parents Teaching a Learner to Drive. I hope this has been of help. Thank you for listening.